They never used my full name when they passed me over. Never Michael Donovan, just Mike in IT. That's what they called me for 12 years, as if reducing my name made it easier to reduce my worth. Mike in IT isn't ready yet. Mike in IT needs more leadership experience. Mike in IT should wait for the next round. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I held the rejection letter in my hands, the 12th one in as many years. The paper was heavy stock, premium letterhead with embossed company logo. Westfield Technologies spared no expense on rejection letters, apparently. This one was signed by Caroline Wright, our newly appointed head of operations, the position I'd been passed over for. Again, Caroline had been with the company for exactly 9 months. I had been there for 12 years. The corner office on the east side of the building, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river, would be hers now. I'd walked past that office every day for over a decade, imagining my name on the door. Now it would say Caroline Wright, head of operations. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my desk drawer, right on top of the other 11, arranged chronologically like a museum of disappointment. Each one was nearly identical. After careful consideration, other candidates wish you the best. The only things that changed were the dates and the signatures. I looked around my cubicle. 4th floor, center row, no window. The same desk I'd had since 2011. My coffee mug that read "World's Most Patient Employee," a gag gift from the team 3 rejections ago, sat next to a stack of implementation plans I'd developed for our new server architecture. The plans that would save the company millions. The plans that Caroline would now take credit for. My phone buzzed with a text from Ellie, my wife of 14 years. Well, I didn't need to elaborate. She knew. After 12 rejections, we had developed a rhythm. Tonight would be takeout from that Thai place we liked, a bottle of wine, and reassurances that next time will be different. Except we both knew it wouldn't be. I texted back. Same story. Different signature. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm sorry, Michael. Their loss. Love you. I put my phone away and turned back to my computer screen. The dashboard I'd designed showed our network operating at 99.8% efficiency. No one knew our systems like I did. No one could troubleshoot them like I could. When the ransomware attack hit last year, I was the one who stayed for 72 hours straight to recover our data without paying the hackers a cent. And yet, here I was. Still, Mike in IT, still waiting for recognition that never came. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 6:37 p.m., long after most employees had left, I was still at my desk reviewing security protocols. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping from the servers. I liked the building better this way, when I could think without interruption, when I could work without pretending each rejection didn't sting. You're still here? I looked up to see Thomas Hayes, the company founder and CEO, standing by my cubicle. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. As always, his custom suit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Just finishing up some security patches, I said, straightening in my chair. Thomas nodded, his eyes drifting to my screen. I heard about the operations position. Caroline's background in fintech was exactly what we needed right now. What you needed was someone who understood your systems from the ground up, I thought. What you needed was someone who had saved this company repeatedly without recognition. What you needed was me. But I just nodded. She'll do great. Thomas seemed to hesitate, as if he wanted to say more. Instead, he adjusted his Rolex and said, "Don't stay too late," before walking away. I watched him go, wondering if he even remembered that I had been one of his first 10 hires. That when Westfield Technologies was just 3 rooms in a business park, I was the one who set up our first servers, configured our first networks, worked weekends and holidays to keep. I shut down my computer and gathered my things. As I walked through the empty office toward the elevator, I passed by the East Corner office, Caroline's new domain. The door was open, and I could see her inside, arranging family photos on the credenza. She looked up and saw me. "Michael! Hey, I was hoping to catch you." I paused in the doorway, keeping one hand on the frame as if ready to push off and leave at any moment. "I just wanted to say," she continued, "your infrastructure plan is brilliant. I was reviewing it today, and the cost savings alone are, well, they're going to make me look very good in my first quarter." At least she was acknowledging it was my work. That was something. "Thanks," I said. "It should cut operational costs by about 22% if implemented correctly. I was hoping you might walk me through some of the technical details tomorrow. Maybe a working lunch?" I nodded, already knowing how this would go. I would explain my vision. She would take notes, and then she would present it to the board as her initiative, perhaps with a footnote acknowledging my assistance. "Sure, send me a calendar invite." She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Great. And, Michael, I know this must be awkward. I want you to know I value your experience here. But not enough to champion me for the position you now hold," I thought. "It's fine," I said. "Good night, Caroline." I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. As the doors opened, I caught my reflection in the polished metal interior. I looked tired. Not just end-of-day tired, but soul-deep exhausted. 12 years of being overlooked will do that to a person. That night, as predicted, Ellie and I sat at our kitchen table with containers of pad thai and a bottle of Cabernet between us. Our apartment wasn't large. We could have afforded better with my salary, but we'd been saving aggressively for years. For what, I wasn't entirely sure anymore. "So that's it?" Ellie asked, twirling noodles around her fork. 12 rejections? And you're just going to keep taking it?" I took a long sip of wine. What choice do I have? The job market for someone my age isn't exactly booming. "You're 43, not 73, she said, putting her fork down. "And you're brilliant at what you do. Any company would be lucky to have you." "Maybe," I said, "but I've been at Westfield for so long. All my experience is there. All my projects, my systems." "Your systems," Ellie repeated softly. "That's just it, isn't it? You think of them as yours." She wasn't wrong. I had built most of Westfield's digital infrastructure from scratch. I knew every server, every network node, every security protocol intimately. In many ways, I was the invisible foundation upon which the entire company operated. "It's not just about the promotion," I admitted. "It's about the recognition." 12 years, Ellie. 12 years of solving every crisis, building every system, training every new IT hire. And they still see me as just Mike in IT, replaceable, interchangeable. Ellie reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm against mine, strong and steady as always. "Then maybe it's time they learned exactly how irreplaceable you are." I looked at her, surprised by the edge in her voice. Ellie had always been my supporter, my cheerleader. But there was something different in her eyes now. A spark of defiance I hadn't seen in years. "What are you suggesting?" She squeezed my hand. "I'm suggesting that after 12 rejections, you've earned the right to consider other options. Options that might make Westfield realize exactly what they've been taking for granted." That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, I sat in our small home office, the blue light from my laptop illuminating the room. I opened a folder labeled Contingency, something I had started almost as a joke after my 5th rejection. Inside were detailed notes on Westfield's entire infrastructure, documentation that existed nowhere else in the company's records. Not because I was hiding anything, but because no one had ever asked for it. They trusted that Mike in IT would always be there to make things work, to fix whatever broke, to keep the digital heart of the company beating. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly building something else on the side. Something that could either save Westfield Technologies or bring it to its knees, depending on how the next few months played out. I opened a new document and began to type, "Exit strategy." I made my way to the server room, used my keycard to enter, and began what would look to anyone else like routine maintenance. What I was actually doing was activating the first phase of what I had begun to think of as my insurance policy. For years, I had been the only one who truly understood the complex web of systems that kept Westfield running. I had documented everything, of course. I was nothing if not thorough. But those documents were stored in repositories that only I maintained, organized in ways that only made sense to me. Not maliciously. It had simply evolved that way because no one else cared enough to learn. They were happy to let Mike and IT handle the technical details while they focused on growth strategies and market positioning. What I was doing now was implementing a series of subtle changes, nothing that would affect current operations, but modifications that would make the system increasingly dependent on my personal intervention over time. If I stayed, I could keep everything running smoothly. If I left, well, that was the point. At 9:30, I had my scheduled lunch meeting with Caroline. We sat in the company cafeteria, my laptop open between us as I walked her through the infrastructure plan I had developed. So these changes would essentially consolidate our server architecture while increasing redundancy? She asked, taking notes on her tablet. Exactly, I said. It's counterintuitive, but by centralizing certain functions while distributing others, we create a more resilient system overall. What I didn't tell her was that the system would be resilient only if implemented and maintained exactly as I had designed it. Any deviation, any attempt to modify my plans without understanding the underlying architecture would create vulnerabilities that would be nearly impossible for anyone else to identify. This is impressive, Michael, Caroline said, looking up from her notes. How long would implementation take? About 3 months for the full rollout. I can handle most of it myself. She nodded, seemingly pleased. Perfect. I'd like to present this to the executive team next week. Would you be willing to join me for that meeting? I kept my face neutral, hiding my surprise. In 12 years, I had never been invited to an executive meeting. Of course. Great, I'll have my assistant add you to the calendar invite. She closed her tablet and studied me for a moment. You know, I've been reviewing your personnel file. Your contributions to Westfield are, well, they're remarkable. I waited, wondering where this was going. I have to ask, she continued, why have you stayed? After being passed over so many times for advancement, most people would have left. It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly over the years. I built these systems, I said simply. They're like my children in a way. I couldn't just abandon them. Caroline nodded slowly. I understand attachment to your work. But sometimes, Michael, we have to let our creations grow without us. I smiled slightly. Perhaps. But not quite yet. After our meeting, I returned to my cubicle to find an email from Thomas Hayes himself, requesting my presence in his office at 3 p.m. This was unusual. I typically interacted with Thomas only when there was a major system issue that affected the entire company. I spent the next few hours finalizing the documentation for Phase 1 of my exit strategy, carefully storing encrypted copies in multiple secure locations. By the time I headed to Thomas's office, I felt oddly calm, as if I had finally taken control of a situation that had been controlling me for years. Thomas's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the 6th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and his desk, a massive slab of polished walnut, looked like it had been carved from a single tree. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. Michael, he said, using my full name for what felt like the first time in years. Caroline tells me you've developed quite an impressive infrastructure plan. Just doing my job, I replied. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying me. That's part of what I wanted to discuss. Your job. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm aware that you've been passed over for advancement multiple times. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. The truth is, Michael, Thomas nodded. Of course. And that's why I want to create a new position for you, Chief Technology Officer. You would report directly to me, with a seat on the executive team. Your first task would be implementing this new infrastructure plan in partnership with Caroline. I felt a moment of genuine surprise. After all this time, Now they were offering me an executive role? The timing was suspicious, to say the least. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully. "May I ask what prompted this decision now, after 12 previous rejections?" Thomas had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Let's just say that recent security audits have highlighted how dependent we are on your expertise. The board feels it's time to formally recognize your importance to Westfield." Translation: someone had finally realized just how vulnerable the company would be if I decided to leave. "I'll need time to consider the offer," I said. Thomas frowned slightly. "Of course. But I was hoping for your answer by the end of the week. We'd like to announce the new position at the quarterly all-hands meeting next Monday." I nodded, standing to indicate the meeting was over from my perspective. "You'll have my decision by Friday." As I walked back to my cubicle, my mind was racing. The CTO position was everything I had wanted for years. Recognition, a seat at the table, direct influence over the company's technological direction. But it came only after I had begun implementing my exit strategy, only after they had glimpsed how vulnerable they would be without me. It felt less like recognition of my worth, and more like a panic reaction to the prospect of losing their safety net. That evening, I shared the news with Ellie over dinner. "They offered you CTO?" she asked. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Just like that? After 12 rejections? Apparently they've suddenly realized I'm essential," I said, making air quotes around the word. Ellie put her fork down. "And you're considering it?" "It's what I've wanted for years," I pointed out. "Is it? Or is it what you wanted before they rejected you 12 times? She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Michael, think about it. They're not offering you this position because they value you. They're offering it because they're afraid of losing you." I couldn't argue with her assessment. "So what would you have me do? Turn it down out of pride?" "No," she said. "I would have you leverage your position of strength to get what you truly deserve, not just what they're willing to give now that they're scared." I considered her words. "You mean negotiate for better terms?" Ellie shook her head. "I mean complete your exit strategy. Show them exactly what Westfield Technologies looks like without Michael Donovan, even for a few days. And then, when they're truly desperate, renegotiate from a position of absolute power." I stared at her, slightly shocked by the suggestion. "You want me to deliberately create problems for the company?" "Not problems," she corrected. "Awareness. Make them aware of exactly what they've been taking for granted all these years. Sometimes people only value what they've lost." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Ellie's suggestion, about the exit strategy I had already begun implementing. Phase 1 was already in motion. Subtle changes to the system that would require increasingly specific knowledge to maintain over time. Phase 2 would be more direct, systematically removing my own backdoor access points and support systems that kept everything running smoothly. Without those invisible supports, the entire infrastructure would become increasingly unstable. And Phase 3. Phase 3 would be my departure. Complete and final, leaving Westfield with systems they couldn't fully understand or maintain. The question was, did I have the courage to see it through? After 12 years of loyalty, could I really walk away and let them face the consequences of undervaluing me for so long? By morning, I had made my decision. I walked into Westfield's offices the next morning with a strange sense of calm. For 12 years, I'd arrived with the weight of the company on my shoulders, determined to prove my worth. Today was different. Today, I knew exactly what I was worth, and I was about to make sure everyone else did too. I accepted the invitation and then opened my secure drive where the details of Phase 2 were stored. Unlike Phase 1, which consisted of subtle modifications that would only show their effects over time, Phase 2 was more direct. It involved systematically documenting and then removing the unofficial support systems I had built over the years, the backdoor solutions and workarounds that kept Westfield's digital infrastructure functioning smoothly despite its official shortcomings. These weren't security vulnerabilities or anything unethical. They were elegant solutions to complex problems that no one else had been able to solve. Patches and scripts and monitoring tools that existed outside the official documentation, but were essential to daily operations. I began by compiling everything into a comprehensive guide, the Westfield Systems Bible. I called it privately. This would be my insurance policy, my bargaining chip. When systems began failing, I would be the only one with the knowledge to fix them. But I wasn't just planning to create chaos. That wasn't who I was. Each change would be reversible, each problem solvable. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking recognition. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Ellie. "Did you decide?" I texted back. "Yes. Phase 2 underway." 3 dots appeared immediately then. "Proud of you. Call if you need anything." I smiled, putting my phone away as Derek from the marketing team approached my desk. "Hey, Mike, the presentation platform is acting weird again. Do you have a minute?" Mike, not Michael. Some habits would take longer to break. "Sure," I said, following him to the conference room where the marketing team was preparing for a client pitch. The problem was simple, a compatibility issue between their presentation software and the room's display system. I'd fixed this same issue dozens of times before, using a custom script I'd written years ago. "Let me show you how to fix this," I said to Derek, walking him through the process step by step instead of just doing it myself as I normally would. "Take notes, because this might happen again." Derek looked surprised but dutifully wrote down each step. "I always thought this was some kind of IT magic only you could do." "No magic," I said. "Just systems knowledge that should be shared." This would be my approach for the next 3 days. Document everything, share knowledge where appropriate, but systematically remove my unofficial support systems while preparing for my departure. By the end of the day, I had completed the first third of Phase 2, documenting and then removing 5 key support scripts that monitored critical functions. Within 24 to 48 hours, small issues would begin to appear. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to raise questions. As I was leaving the office, Caroline caught up with me at the elevator. "Michael, do you have dinner plans? I'd like to discuss the CTO position Thomas mentioned to you." I considered declining but decided it might be valuable to hear what she had to say. "Sure. What did you have in mind?" 30 minutes later, we were seated at Vesper, an upscale restaurant a few blocks from the office. Caroline ordered a bottle of wine without consulting me, a Bordeaux that probably cost more than my daily salary. "I wanted to talk to you outside the office," she said as the waiter poured our wine. "About the CTO position and, well, about your history with Westfield." I took a sip of wine, waiting for her to continue. "I've only been here 9 months," she said, "but it didn't take long to realize how essential you are to operations. When I asked why you weren't already in leadership, I got vague answers about you being more valuable in your current role." "That's been the company line for 12 years, I said evenly. Caroline nodded. "I pushed back on that thinking during my first month, suggested you should be promoted to director at minimum, was told you were being groomed for something bigger." She made air quotes around the phrase. This was news to me. And yet, when the head of operations position opened up, my name wasn't even on the shortlist. "Actually, it was," she said, surprising me. "I saw the initial candidate list. Your name was there, but Thomas removed it before interviews began. Said you were too valuable in your current capacity." I felt a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. "And now suddenly I'm CTO material." Caroline leaned forward. "Between us, the security audit last month scared them. It highlighted single points of failure in our infrastructure, with you being the biggest one, not because of anything you've done wrong, but because you're the only one who fully understands our systems." "So Thomas wants to lock me in with a title," I said. "Essentially." Caroline took a sip of her wine. "But I think it's an opportunity for you, regardless of their motives. You'd have real power, a seat at the table." After 12 years of being kept from that table, she studied me for a moment. "You're planning to turn it down." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I'm considering all my options, including leaving." I smiled slightly. "That's always an option." Caroline leaned back in her chair. "If you leave, Michael, Westfield will be in serious trouble." "I've been here less than a year," and even I can see that. Then perhaps Westfield should have valued me appropriately before now. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I agree with you, but I'd still like you to consider the CTO position. If not for Westfield's sake, then for the sake of what you've built here. The conversation shifted to other topics after that, but Caroline's words stayed with me. For the sake of what you've built, that had always been my weakness. My attachment to the systems I'd created, my unwillingness to let them fail even when the company failed to recognize my worth. But not anymore. The next morning, I continued with Phase 2, methodically removing more of my unofficial support systems. By noon, the first symptoms began to appear. The customer portal experienced intermittent slowdowns. The automated backup system reported synchronization errors. 3 department heads emailed about minor glitches in their workflow tools. All issues I would normally fix within minutes, often before anyone even noticed them. Today, I logged each problem and provided standard troubleshooting responses, knowing they wouldn't resolve the underlying issues. By 3 p.m., Thomas's assistant was at my desk. "Mr. Hayes would like to see you," she said, her expression concerned. "There are some system issues he wants to discuss." I followed her to Thomas's office, where I found him standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "He's here now," Thomas said to whoever was on the line. "I'll call you back." He hung up and turned to me. "Michael, we're experiencing some unusual system behaviors today. Multiple departments reporting issues." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, I've been logging them. Nothing critical yet, but unusual patterns." "Can you fix them?" he asked, the question revealing just how little he understood about what I actually did. "I'm working on diagnosing the root causes," I said. "Some of these issues suggest deeper structural problems that might require significant rebuilding." Thomas frowned. "Rebuilding? We can't afford downtime right now. The Philips account is hanging by a thread, and their portal access is one of the affected systems." "I understand the urgency," I said. "I'll prioritize the Philips portal. But I should warn you. These issues could be symptoms of larger problems." "What kind of problems?" I chose my words carefully. "Years of rapid growth without corresponding infrastructure investment. Temporary solutions that were never properly replaced with permanent ones. Technical debt, essentially." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Just fix it, Michael. Whatever resources you need." "I'll do my best," I said, turning to leave. "And Michael," he called after me, "have you considered the CTO offer?" I paused at the door. "Still considering. You'll have my answer by Friday." By the end of Wednesday, the issues had multiplied. Nothing catastrophic, but a steady drip of problems that kept the IT team scrambling and department heads increasingly concerned. I provided solutions where I could, but deliberately avoided implementing the quick fixes I would have used in the past. Thursday morning, I arrived to find the office in a state of controlled panic. Overnight, the international servers had experienced synchronization failures, meaning our offices in London and Singapore had limited access to the main database. The customer portal was running at 40% capacity. The financial reporting system was generating errors that the finance team couldn't explain. Caroline was waiting at my desk when I arrived. "Please tell me you can fix this," she said without preamble. "We have the board on our backs and clients threatening to walk." I set down my bag and booted up my computer. "I'll need complete system access and authority to—" Caroline studied me for a moment, her expression shifting from desperate to curious. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" I held her gaze. "I've been warning about infrastructure vulnerabilities for years." No one listened. She nodded slowly. "I'll make sure Thomas understands the severity. Just please, get us back online." For the rest of Thursday, I worked with focused intensity, implementing temporary fixes that would restore basic functionality without addressing the underlying issues I had deliberately exposed. The IT team followed my instructions without question, in awe of my ability to navigate problems they couldn't even fully comprehend. By late afternoon, the customer portal was back online, The international servers were synchronizing again, and the financial system was stable enough for basic operations. But I made sure to leave enough unresolved issues to maintain pressure. At 6 p.m., Thomas called me to his office again. Caroline was already there, along with the CFO and the head of sales. "Michael," Thomas said as I entered, "I understand you've stabilized the critical systems." "For now," I said. "But the underlying infrastructure issues remain." "What would it take to permanently resolve them?" the CFO asked. I took a seat at the conference table. "A complete overhaul of our core systems. The infrastructure plan I developed is a start, but it would need to be expanded significantly. We're looking at 3 to 6 months of intensive work." "6 months?" the head of sales exclaimed. "We can't afford that kind of timeline. We're already losing clients because of today's issues." "Then you should have addressed these vulnerabilities years ago when I first identified them," I said calmly. "This isn't a sudden crisis. It's the inevitable result of prioritizing growth over stability." The room fell silent. I had never spoken so bluntly to the executive team before. Thomas cleared his throat. "You mentioned your infrastructure plan. Is that something you could implement more quickly with additional resources?" "Possibly," I said. "With the right team and complete authority, we might compress the timeline to 2 months. But it would require significant investment and organizational changes." "What kind of changes?" Caroline asked. "A complete restructuring of the IT department. New approval processes for system modifications. Mandatory technical training for department heads." I paused. "And a leadership position with actual decision-making authority over technology infrastructure." Thomas exchanged glances with the others. "Like the CTO position we discussed." "Similar," I said, "but with expanded scope and authority. And appropriate compensation for 12 years of expertise." "You have our attention," the CFO said. "What exactly are you proposing?" I laid out my terms clearly and without emotion. Chief Technology Officer, with full executive benefits. A seat on the board of directors. A technology budget under my direct control. A specialized team reporting only to me. And compensation that reflected not just my future value but my past contributions, including substantial equity in the company. When I finished, the room was silent again. Finally, Thomas spoke. "That's quite a package, Michael." "It's what I'm worth," I said simply. "And significantly less than what you'll lose if these system issues continue or worsen." "We need to discuss this privately," Thomas said. I stood. "Of course. You have until noon tomorrow for a decision. After that, I'll be forced to explore other options." As I reached the door, Caroline called after me. "And if we meet your terms? How quickly can you resolve these issues?" I turned back. "The critical problems?" "By end of day tomorrow." "The underlying infrastructure?" 2 months, as I said." "And if we don't meet your terms?" the CFO asked. I smiled slightly. "Then Westfield will need to find someone else who understands systems that took me 12 years to build. Good luck with that." I left them to their deliberations and returned to my desk. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time for Phase 3. Either my departure or my ascension, depending on their response. That evening, I shared the day's events with Ellie over dinner. They looked terrified. I told her, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from my voice. "As they should be," she said, raising her glass in a toast, "to finally being valued appropriately. They haven't agreed to my terms yet." "They will," she said confidently. "They have no choice." I nodded. "But something was— You built their infrastructure from nothing. You saved them from countless disasters. And how did they repay you? With rejection after rejection. With Mike in IT instead of Michael Donovan, executive leader." She was right, of course. But still, I couldn't fully shake the feeling that I had compromised my own standards. "Just remember," Ellie continued, "you're not destroying anything. You're simply showing them exactly what they've taken for granted all these years." I slept poorly that night, my mind racing with possibilities. What if they called my bluff? What if they decided they could replace me after all? I had other options. Several competitors would hire me in a heartbeat. But leaving Westfield would mean abandoning my life's work, the systems I had nurtured for over a decade. By morning, I had resigned myself to either outcome. I would either walk into Westfield as a newly appointed executive with real power, or I would walk out for the last time, my resignation letter in hand. I arrived at 8 a.m. as usual and found an email from Thomas waiting for me. My office, 9 a.m. Full executive team will be present. At 8:55, I gathered my things. The resignation letter I had prepared, a flash drive with critical system documentation, and a small brass compass my father had given me when I graduated college. "Always know which way you're heading," he had told me. Today, I finally did. Thomas's office was crowded when I arrived. The entire executive team sat around the conference table, along with 2 board members I recognized from the annual meetings. Thomas gestured for me to take the empty seat at the far end of the table. "Michael," he began, "we've discussed your proposal at length. The board was convened for an emergency session last night." I waited, my expression neutral. "Your terms are substantial," Thomas continued. "Under normal circumstances, they would be considered excessive for someone stepping into an executive role for the first time." I began to reach for my resignation letter. "However," Thomas raised a hand to stop me, "these are not normal circumstances. The events of the past 2 days have made it abundantly clear that Westfield's technological infrastructure, and by extension, our entire business, is critically dependent on your expertise." The CFO spoke next. "We've calculated the potential losses if these system issues continue or worsen. The figures are sobering. Therefore," Thomas said, "we are prepared to meet your terms in full. Chief Technology Officer with executive benefits, board seat, independent budget, specialized team, and compensation package as requested, including equity." I felt a rush of vindication but kept my expression measured. "And my authority over infrastructure decisions will be absolute? Within the scope of your role, yes. Major initiatives will still require board approval, but your expertise will be given appropriate weight." I nodded slowly. "When would this take effect?" "Immediately," Thomas said. "The board has already approved the position and terms. The paperwork is ready for your signature." Caroline slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were contracts detailing exactly what Thomas had described. Everything I had asked for and more. "We need you, Michael," Thomas said. And for the first time in 12 years, I believed him. Not because he suddenly valued me as a person, but because he finally understood my true worth to the company. "There's one more thing," I said, closing the folder without signing. "I want a public acknowledgement of my contributions to Westfield over the past 12 years. At the all-hands meeting on Monday." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "Of course. We'll announce your appointment and recognize your historical contributions." I opened the folder again and signed each document, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders with each signature. Not the weight of responsibility that remained, but the weight of being undervalued, overlooked, invisible. "Now," I said, closing the folder and sliding it back across the table, "let's discuss how we're going to fix our infrastructure." For the next 2 hours, I led the executive team through a detailed explanation of the issues facing Westfield systems and my plan to address them. They listened with rapt attention, asking intelligent questions and offering resources I hadn't even requested. By noon, I had their complete buy-in on a comprehensive infrastructure overhaul. By 5 p.m., I had resolved the most critical system issues, restoring full functionality to the customer portal. 12 years of being Mike in IT. And finally, one strategic gamble that had changed everything. Caroline stopped by on her way out. "Congratulations, Michael." Or should I say, Mr. CTO? I smiled. "Michael is fine." She nodded, then hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" "Sure." "The system issues this week? They weren't random, were they?" I held her gaze steadily. "Let's just say I've always had a comprehensive understanding of our infrastructure, both its strengths and its vulnerabilities." A look of realization crossed her face. "You orchestrated this." "I simply stopped implementing the unofficial fixes that I've been using for years to keep everything running smoothly. The vulnerabilities were always there, I just stopped hiding them. She studied me for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Brilliantly played, Michael. I look forward to working with you on the executive team. After she left, I texted Ellie. It worked. All terms accepted. CTO effective immediately. Her reply came instantly. Never doubted you for a second? Champagne tonight? Absolutely, I texted back. And maybe a vacation next month. My new benefits package includes 4 weeks paid leave. As I packed up my things, preparing to leave my cubicle for the last time, I thought about the journey ahead. The infrastructure rebuilding would be challenging but exhilarating. The board responsibilities would be new territory. And the executive team dynamics would take some adjustment. But for the first time in 12 years, I would be Michael Donovan, Chief Technology Officer, not Mike in IT. I would have the authority to implement my vision, the resources to build lasting solutions, and the recognition I had earned through years of invisible excellence. I placed my world's most patient employee mug in my bag as a reminder of where I'd come from. Then I took out the brass compass my father had given me and placed it on top of my new contract. True north. Finally. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office wearing a new suit and carrying a new sense of purpose. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and by 9:45, the main conference room was already filled beyond capacity. Thomas began the meeting with standard business updates, but I could feel the anticipation in the room. Everyone had experienced the system issues the previous week, and rumors had been circulating about major changes. Finally, Thomas turned to me. I'd like to introduce Westfield's new Chief Technology Officer and newest board member, Michael Donovan. The room erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause. As I stood to address the company, I caught sight of my old team in the back row. They were cheering the loudest. "Thank you," I said as the applause died down. For 12 years, I've had the privilege of building and maintaining the systems that power Westfield Technologies. Today, I'm honored to take on a new role in guiding our technological future. I paused, looking out at the faces of colleagues who had known me only as Mike in IT for so long. Some of you experienced frustrations with our systems last week. I want to assure you that those issues are being addressed as part of a comprehensive infrastructure overhaul that will make Westfield more resilient, more efficient, and more competitive in the marketplace. I didn't mention my role in exposing those vulnerabilities. That would remain my secret, mine and the executive team's. This is a new chapter for Westfield, I continued, and I look forward to writing it together with all of you. As I returned to my seat, Thomas stepped forward again. I want to add something, he said. For 12 years, Michael has been the backbone of our technological infrastructure, often working behind the scenes without recognition. Today's appointment is long overdue, and on behalf of the entire leadership team, I want to acknowledge that we should have recognized Michael's contributions much sooner. It was the public acknowledgement I had requested, and more than I had expected. I nodded my thanks to Thomas, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't anticipated. After the meeting, as I walked to my new office, the East Corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river, I passed by my old cubicle. Someone had already claimed it, a young IT specialist named Jamie who had joined the company just months ago. I stopped. "Jamie, right?" She looked up, surprised to be addressed by the new CTO. "Yes, sir." "No, sir, necessary," I said. "Just Mike." Later that evening, after our guests had departed, Ellie and I sat on the porch swing overlooking the river, sharing a quiet moment under the night sky. "You've created something remarkable," she said, her head resting against my shoulder. "They look at you like you're some kind of corporate messiah." I laughed softly. "Hardly. I just showed them a different way to value people." "Don't diminish what you've accomplished, Michael." Her voice was serious now. "You took 12 rejections and turned them into a revolution." I thought about this as we watched the moonlight dance across the water. What had started as a personal quest for recognition had evolved into something far more meaningful, a complete reimagining of what a technology company could be. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find Thomas Hayes waiting for me. Though retired, he still served as chairman of the board and occasionally visited to check on the company he had founded. "Michael," he greeted me warmly. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course. I said, gesturing for him to take a seat. "How are you enjoying retirement?" "More than I expected." He smiled. "Though I miss the energy of this place, especially now. It feels different, vibrant." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The board reviewed your first-year performance yesterday," he said. "I won't keep you in suspense. They're thrilled. Revenue up 28%, cost down 15%, innovation metrics off the charts. But what impressed them most was the employee satisfaction survey. I knew those results well. A 42-point improvement in overall satisfaction, with particularly strong gains in feeling valued and opportunities for advancement. We've worked hard to create a culture where people feel seen," I said simply. Thomas leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I owe you an apology, Michael. For years, I let you languish in IT despite your obvious talents. I convinced myself it was because you were too valuable there. But the truth is, I failed to see your full potential." His candor surprised me. In the old Westfield, executives never admitted mistakes, especially not to former subordinates. "What changed?" I asked. "You did," he replied, "the day you presented your terms after the system crisis. That's when I realized you weren't just a talented engineer. You were a leader who understood your worth and had the courage to demand recognition." I considered his words carefully. It shouldn't have taken a crisis for that recognition to come. "No," he agreed. "It shouldn't have. And that's the lesson I've taken from watching your leadership this past year. Recognition shouldn't be something people have to fight for. It should be woven into the fabric of the organization." This acknowledgement from the man who had overlooked me for so long felt like the closing of a circle. Not just personal vindication, but confirmation that the cultural transformation I'd initiated was reaching even those who had been most entrenched in the old ways. After Thomas left, I pulled out the brass compass that still sat on my desk. A talisman of sorts, reminding me of where I'd come from and where I was headed. The needle pointed steadily north, just as it always had. My true north had evolved over the past 18 months. What had begun as a quest for personal recognition had expanded into something far more significant, creating a company where recognition was the rule, not the exception. That afternoon, I met with our human resources director to review a new initiative I'd been developing, the Recognition Revolution. It would formalize many of the cultural changes we'd implemented, creating systems to ensure that contributions at all levels were consistently identified, celebrated, and rewarded. "The cornerstone is our new promotion pathway," I explained, showing her the flowchart I'd designed. "Notice there's no minimum time requirement in any position. Advancement is based entirely on impact and innovation, with clear metrics for each role." She studied the document with interest. "This is radical, Michael. Most companies use time and role as a primary criterion. Most companies waste talent by forcing arbitrary waiting periods," I countered. "I waited 12 years for recognition that should have come much sooner. I won't let that happen to anyone else at Westfield." The Recognition Revolution launched the following month, accompanied by a company-wide restructuring that eliminated 3 layers of middle management and created direct pathways for ideas to flow from entry-level employees to executive decision-makers. The response was immediate and powerful. Innovation submissions doubled again. Cross-department employees who had been quietly contributing for years suddenly found their voices, sharing ideas that had been suppressed under the old regime. One such employee was Leonard from accounting, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had worked at Westfield for over a decade without promotion. During an open innovation forum, another new initiative, Leonard hesitantly presented a completely reimagined billing system that would significantly reduce processing time while improving accuracy. "I've actually had this idea for about 7 years," he admitted when I asked how long he'd been developing the concept. I mentioned it to my manager back then, but was told it would be too disruptive to implement. "And now?" I prompted. He smiled, confidence visibly growing. "Now I feel like disruption is actually valued here. Like my ideas matter." Within 3 months, Leonard's billing system was fully implemented, saving the company over $400,000 annually and reducing client billing disputes by 78%. Leonard himself was promoted to Director of Financial Innovation, a position we created specifically to leverage his previously untapped talents. His story became emblematic of the transformation occurring throughout Westfield, a symbol of what happens when companies value people for their contributions rather than their titles or tenure. At the 2-year mark of my CEO tenure, Harvard Business Review published a case study on Westfield's cultural transformation. The article, titled The Recognition Revolution, How One CEO Transformed Corporate Culture, detailed our journey from hierarchical stagnation to innovative powerhouse. What's particularly remarkable about Donovan's approach, the article concluded, is how personal experience informed institutional change. Having been overlooked for 12 years despite critical contributions, Donovan redesigned Westfield's entire corporate structure to ensure that no employee would ever face the same fate. The day the article was published, I received an unexpected email from my former boss, Bryce Lang. He had left Westfield shortly after I became CTO, taking a position at a competing firm. "Michael," his message began, "I saw the HBR piece today. I probably don't need to tell you that I recognized myself in the narrative, the manager who failed to see your potential. Reading about what you've built at Westfield made me reflect on my own leadership failures. I've spent the past 2 years trying to prove you wrong, to show that my way was still valid. Today, I'm finally ready to admit that you were right. Recognition isn't just about making people feel good. It's about unlocking potential that hierarchy keeps buried. Congratulations on your success. It was well earned." I sat with this message for a long time, feeling neither vindication nor resentment, just a quiet acknowledgement that transformation reaches beyond our immediate sphere, creating ripples we might never fully see. That evening, I shared Bryce's email with Ellie as we walked along the riverbank near our home. "Does it feel like closure?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. I think closure came long before this, when I stopped needing external validation and started focusing on creating a system where others wouldn't have to fight for recognition the way I did. She squeezed my hand. "You know what I'm most proud of? That you didn't just use your position to settle scores or build monuments to your ego. You used it to ensure no one else would experience what you did." Her observation crystallized something I had felt but never fully articulated. True leadership isn't about personal vindication. It's about creating environments where others can thrive in ways you weren't allowed to. The following week, I implemented the final phase of the Recognition Revolution, a radical transparency initiative that made every employee's contributions visible throughout the organization. We created a digital platform where projects, innovations, and achievements were documented with clear attribution, ensuring that no one could take credit for another's work and no contribution could be overlooked. We called it Visible Value, and it transformed how recognition functioned at Westfield. No longer dependent on manager awareness or advocacy, employees could document their own contributions and receive acknowledgement directly from peers, executives, and even clients. Jamie, now a seasoned co-CTO, described it best during the launch meeting. "This isn't just a platform, it's a promise that your work will never be invisible again." Her words resonated deeply with me. Invisibility had been the most painful aspect of my 12 years of stagnation. Not just the lack of promotion, but the feeling that my essential contributions went unseen by those with the power to acknowledge them. 3 years into my tenure as CEO, Westfield Technologies had been completely transformed. We had doubled in size, expanded to 12 international offices, and become known as much for our innovative corporate culture as for our technical solutions. More importantly, we had created a workplace where talent rose naturally to the surface, where brilliant ideas could come from anywhere, regardless of title or tenure. The days of Mike in IT being overlooked for 12 years were firmly in the past. At our annual leadership retreat, I gathered the executive team and department heads, 32 people in total, for a reflective session on our journey. "Look around this room," I invited them. 3 years ago, more than half of you weren't in leadership positions. Some of you weren't even at Westfield yet. I pointed to Priya, now our Chief Marketing Officer, to Leonard, heading our Financial Innovation Division, to Jamie and Devin, the co-CTOs who had revolutionized our technical infrastructure. Each of you represents what happens when companies value contribution over convention, innovation over hierarchy, recognition over restriction. But your presence here isn't the end goal, it's just the beginning. I revealed the next phase of our transformation, a company-wide mentorship initiative designed to identify and nurture talent at all levels, ensuring that the recognition revolution would continue even as Westfield grew. "The true measure of our success won't be what we've built so far," I told them. "It will be whether this culture of recognition outlasts all of us. Whether 20 years from now, Westfield remains a place where no one has to orchestrate a crisis to prove their worth. Later, as the retreat wound down, I found myself standing on the balcony of the mountain lodge we'd rented, gazing out at the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Caroline joined me, leaning against the railing. "I've been thinking about how all this started," she said, "with rejection letter number 12 and a system crisis that exposed how essential you were." I smiled. Not my proudest moment, orchestrating that crisis. "But perhaps your most necessary one," she countered. "Sometimes the only way to change a system is to reveal its fundamental flaws." Her words carried wisdom I couldn't deny. My strategic gamble, the carefully orchestrated exposure of Westfield's technological vulnerabilities, had been a calculated risk born of 12 rejections and years of invisibility. It had forced recognition that might never have come otherwise. "The difference," I said after a moment, "is that no one at Westfield today would need to take such drastic measures to be seen. We've built a culture where value is recognized organically, where contribution creates its own visibility." Caroline nodded. "That's your legacy, Michael. Not just your rise from overlooked IT specialist to CEO, but the system you've built to ensure no one else has to fight for recognition the way you did." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the cubicle on the 4th floor with no window to the executive suite with its panoramic views, from Mike in IT to CEO Michael Donovan. The 12 rejection letters that had once symbolized my stagnation now hung framed in my office, not as reminders of bitterness, but as testimony to persistence and as tangible proof that value, even when unrecognized, remains value. My exit strategy, conceived in frustration and executed with precision, had transformed not just my career, but an entire company culture. What had begun as a personal quest for recognition had evolved into a revolution that touched hundreds of lives. The brass compass my father had given me still sat on my desk, its needle pointing steadily north. But my true north had expanded beyond personal advancement to encompass something far more meaningful, creating a workplace where everyone's contributions were visible, valued, and celebrated. Sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued isn't just rising above it yourself, it's building a system where no one else has to experience that pain. My 12 rejections had become the foundation for hundreds of recognitions, my invisibility, the catalyst for a culture of visibility. And in that transformation lay the ultimate victory, not just over the system that had once overlooked me, but over the very concept of overlooking itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.